welcome to the CDG BizCast. I'm your host, Christian Gonzalez, owner of Creativity Design Group, a digital marketing firm in Houston, Texas. This edition of Business Sins, we're diving into a critical issue that can silently destroy businesses, the lack of accountability. Joining us is Holly Golebiowski, an associate coach at LeaderSkills. Holly will break down how failing to establish accountability can lead to lost revenue and even business failure. You want to build a stronger, more responsible team, won't want to miss this episode. So let's dive into it. Yes, welcome, Holly. Welcome to BizCast. It's a pleasure to have you today.
Thank you, Christian. It is a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
I am very excited to learn more about what you have to share with us on this very serious topic. And I've seen it myself many times, the lack of accountability. And unfortunately, I've seen it too many times where it goes unpunished. But before we talk more about that, please tell us about LeaderSkills and your experience as a business coach.
Sure, I would be happy to. So it's kind of a chicken or the egg situation with LeaderSkills and coaching for me. I have a prior career I refer to as my corporate America career. Around 2018, I decided to quit corporate America to focus on being a coach. Went back to school for that, and that was truly my plan. But if you actually go back in my career before that, about 8 years, I actually had an interesting situation where after being, the rock star, promoted, did very good in my career. And then when I made the jump from on-site management to corporate management, I really struggled. And at that point in time, I was lucky enough to get put in with a really good executive coach. Her name is Nan O'Connor, and she pretty much completely changed my career trajectory. And that ties into what led to LeaderSkills. I refer to myself as student zero for her in the program she created, but I never really expected to become involved in the two. When I quit the corporate America world, I was COO of a medium-sized company that had real estate around the United States, and just really thought I was going to become a coach. So that is what I did. But I was actually having lunch with Nan one day, and she was telling me about how she had developed LeaderSkills, and a lot of it was what her and I went through 8 years before that when I was struggling. And at that time, she asked if I wanted to become involved, and I've become so passionate about helping people be the best them that I got really excited and I dove right in with her. So since then, I have been involved with LeaderSkills as much as I'm involved with my own coaching career. And just to tell you a little bit about LeaderSkills, pretty much, for lack of a better term, it is a no bullshit leadership training program. It is something that allows you to put into practice what you learned day one and have tools at your fingertips. It's mostly an online platform, but for 1 or 2 hours a week over the course of 3 months and a bi-weekly Zoom call, you get to learn quite a bit about how to be a better leader and some very, very good tools and tips that really change people from being managers to leaders. So since then, I have just been very much involved in both of those worlds and very much have been enjoying doing it.
That transition from managers to leaders, that's a major one. And I certainly like to hear that you're passionate about helping others out, because there are a lot of folks out there who operate businesses, both small and large. And there's a lot of managers out there who they were in your position. They work for conglomerates and large corporations, and everybody could use a little help. Nobody's perfect. And it seems like that if we all had a business coach like you in our lives, our careers would be much smoother.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Yeah. And I think a lot of people misunderstand coaches to a degree. They don't quite understand what it is, but it definitely just transforms careers for people. Because how often do we all take time to just step back and think, what am I doing well? What could I do different? What could make me better? And it's a forced application of that pretty much.
That's right. Self-improvement takes a lot of discipline. Some people can't tell right off the bat where they can improve at, which areas they can improve in within their career. And speaking of that topic, we are going to talk about something that many business owners need to put a sole focus on. They need to understand how a lack of accountability can truly be damaging to their overall business image. If they are constantly not taking accountability over a major problem or a failed project, or when they disappointed a client, then that shows that they are not on the right track to improvement. So as we talk about this topic, I would like to start off by asking you to please share with us an example or two about when you witnessed a lack of accountability in the workplace and what happened as a result. And please feel free to share details about how damaging the end result was, because we want all of those out there who are listening to understand that if you don't know how to own your mistakes and take accountability for them, you're basically playing with some serious fire.
Absolutely. I can actually share a personal experience that I lived through. And, it's funny when we think of accountability, I think a lot of times people want to think about tasks. Did they get the tasks done? Is there a task that was accomplished? Was a deadline met? But in a lot of ways, accountability is so much more than that. Even as a leader of a company, you're accountable to hold your team accountable, right? I mean, that is an accountability piece in itself, but that's not necessarily a task item you cross off your checklist in a way that you do other things. So for me, I think something that really was impactful, and it goes back to kind of what I said in the beginning, is I was at a point in my career where I knew I was struggling, but I didn't know why. And my direct supervisor at the time continued to come to me and say, you're not meeting these goals, or something's going on with you and this employee, one of your managers. I think you need to dig in there. And just kept telling me what was wrong, the symptoms really, not really leading me. Like, I don't think that in looking back, there was any accountability on her side to really think about, oh my gosh, I need to give this person the tools and lead them down the road, to do this job they need to, and not just accomplish these specific things. So I can tell you, I was banging my head against the wall, working harder, working more hours, and getting less results. So it became a really ugly situation. And for me, it was hard personally, but also from the other side of that, I imagine the executives at the time were like, how did this person go from being a rock star to completely suffering? And it just trickled down. I mean, I had 5 people that reported to me, each responsible for multi-million-dollar businesses of their own. And, then they were struggling because I was struggling. Their employees struggled because I was struggling. And it really created a kind of a miserable workplace for everybody. And when it came down to it, I recognized that, I needed help beyond that. And I'm thankful. I don't know what made me think of it back then, but I asked for a coach at that time. And that was how I found Nan, and ended up learning what I needed to do. And I realized then what was missing in that. I kept being told what I wasn't doing right, but I wasn't told how to really overcome that and what was really wrong with me as a leader internally. So I always look back at that as something that I don't think a lot of people think about it from that side of it. Not just telling people what to do, telling people how to do it is its own kind of accountability. And it really, a secondary piece of that is I worked for a company where the person over the entire company never really was skeptical of themselves. They did a lot of yelling, did a lot of fussing. They were very angry when things didn't go their way, but there was no accountability on that person's part to make us all better at what we were doing and leading us. They were really just throwing out a lot of, here's what has to happen, here's the facts, but, again, all symptoms of a bigger problem. So I feel like, a lot of people don't realize how much that trickles down, and just holding yourself, being confident of yourself, but skeptical at the same time of yourself as a leader is very important. But that in itself is a big piece of accountability that I think a lot of people miss in business.
I was able to relate to your stories quite a bit, because the main reason why I left the corporate world to start CDG was because of toxic bosses just like that. I still remember a long time ago when I was in college and I took my internship, the boss that I had there was basically like your first example, where he would tell you what you were doing wrong, but he would never really give you a solution. He would just criticize, insult every day, but never give a true solution. And he truly was a toxic guy to work for, and he had a pretty high turnover, most likely for the same reason. Every time I heard about somebody going there to do their internship, they would always end up leaving. And I think that was the problem. On top of that, when I worked there, I was supposed to build websites for the clients like I do for CDG now. But the thing was that I was never allowed to go to the client meetings, and therefore I was never able to truly know what they want. And it was always all about me having to impress the boss as if he were the client, instead of me going to the client directly and asking them what they wanted. So it was always, what does he want? And what he wants really didn't matter, because he's not the paying customer, the client is. So as a result, I was never able to truly live up to my potential. He criticized all of my work, and none of it ever got delivered to the client. All he wanted to do was criticize. So you tell me, how poor of leadership is that?
Yeah. I mean, I think that happens more often than not, sadly, in this world, right? How many people actually teach a leader how to be a leader, right? We teach everybody how to do tasks. So honestly, even the toxic bosses out there we've worked with, I have often thought they don't have the intent to be toxic bosses. That's not what they want to be. It's not who they want to be, but they've never learned the right way to do that. So that's a missing link, I think, in a lot of companies when it comes down to, accountability truly as a leader. So yeah, those are tough situations for people, and it doesn't feel good for anyone.
Absolutely not. And I haven't even shared my second example, which is even worse than the first one. I eventually got fired from that internship. And when he fired me, on the inside, I was jumping for joy because I never wanted to see this clown again. But after college, I went to work for another company. I don't want to give too many details about where I worked for because I don't know who could be listening, but I worked at a facility that was involved in manufacturing, and I had to do some graphic design work for them. So when I worked there, the supervisor I had was extremely hot-headed. He was always blowing his top over everything. He never really knew how to talk to people on a civil manner. It was always him yelling and being demanding and domineering, and he just never showed any sense of civility, except maybe on occasion. He was always just that bad. He was just that hot-headed. Any little thing you could think of, he would just get really upset with you and yell at you for. And unfortunately, he would never get in trouble for this because he worked for the owners of the company. So since there was a lot of nepotism involved, he could pretty much do whatever he wanted and not have to worry about ever getting fired or in trouble. Only us employees who weren't related were the ones at risk. But I can remember so many times where he was just really angry and getting upset with me over every little thing, where he could have just simply sat me down and talked to me about it like a normal human being and not this hot-headed monster who just, basically believes I'm in charge. You shut up and listen to me. Don't ever talk back to me. Don't question me. You are just to shut up and obey me and never talk back. He never said that, but that's what his demeanor said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's pretty darn miserable. That's interesting. Big thing that we do teach with LeaderSkills is that people don't really think about is accountability should be a learning process, not a punitive process. When you're going to someone to talk about an issue, so many times we want to, be angry or, just come down on someone because they didn't do what they should do. And now we feel like we're looking bad. Well, that's not how it should be, right? You never grow anyone or make your team better if you're not treating it as a learning process, as you are a teacher in that process versus just making them feel like, hey, you didn't do it right. Do it better next time. You can't just do that. So I imagine that must have been pretty miserable for you.
Yes, it was. And I was more than happy when they eventually transferred me over to another department because they needed my help over there. So that's exactly what I did. I went to another department and I was no longer under that guy. But that doesn't mean that when I moved to that new department, the leadership over there wasn't miserable as well. Because I do remember that my supervisor in that department, he didn't yell. He certainly didn't blow his top like my previous supervisor did. But he was a constant complainer. He would always say, you didn't do this right. You didn't do that right. And my coworker actually didn't get along with him at all. He actually did get into arguments with him. I never did, but there was just so much toxicity in this company. The leadership at this company was miserable in every department just about, and it just felt good when I finally was able to leave there. I eventually got another job somewhere else, but once again, I was stuck with another level of narcissism when I got to this new company. It's like I just couldn't get away from it. I'm going to share more details about that when we get to the Business Sins episode about toxic bosses. I don't want to give away too much because I want to save the stories for that episode, but needless to say, after having so many bad bosses, I said enough is enough. I am leaving the corporate world for good. I don't want anybody else telling me what to do. I'm going to be my own boss. I started CDG and I was able to build the business off of word of mouth referrals. But let me tell you, some of the bosses I worked for, they were just huge micromanagers. They were unrealistic about a lot of things. And when I say unrealistic, I mean, even though these weren't their exact words, their demeanor basically said, if you can't do your job better than God himself can do it, you don't deserve to work here. You're terrible and you deserve to be fired.
Yeah, that word you said there, micromanagement, is such a good one to me because anytime someone is being micromanaged, that is, pretty much you telling your employee outright, I don't trust you. And the moment an employee doesn't feel trusted, what do? They lose morale. They're not effective once they get that message. So, anytime someone's micromanaging, I always challenge my clients like, whoa, why are you managing them to that level? Because it could be a you problem, not a them problem if you're micromanaging.
When it comes to leadership like that, it's always going to be a you problem, as if, the manager, they're the ones who keep holding such unrealistic high expectations. And, a lot of these guys I work for, they nitpicked over every little thing. They would get upset over every little thing. And it just wasn't worth the stress that they were putting themselves under. They were making themselves miserable because they decided they want to make themselves miserable by believing that their employees that were under them couldn't do the job well. If you would just sit your employees down and talk with them without always getting upset, first of all, it wouldn't make them nervous every day. It wouldn't make them lose their sense of morale. When they're always telling you, you need to do things down to a T just like this, it's ridiculous. It just shows what a true control freak one person is. And a lot of the stuff we're going to cover in the Business Sins episode that will hopefully drop later this year on toxic bosses. But when it comes to these things, it's important to understand that when you're not taking the level of accountability accountability that you should be taking, it can have an irreversible effect on your business and your team, and even worse, on your customer base as a whole.
Yeah.
So with that being said, please tell our small business listeners out there about the dangers of not taking accountability when a customer is not satisfied, because we've talked about what happens when bosses don't take accountability for their employees, but what happens when a business as a whole fails to take accountability when it comes to customer relations? Maybe they dropped the ball on meeting a deadline, or maybe they had an employee that was rude to the customer. It just created an overall bad image for the company.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, especially if you're a smaller business, it is insane to think about how much money all companies will spend on marketing, but not actually look internally. If we just treat the customer right, word of mouth will sell us. It's unreal how often just throwing more marketing dollars at things. And obviously that's good, but a lot of times companies that do not treat their customers right have to work twice as hard to get new customers in the door. But the power of word of mouth is huge. And in today's day and age, we all know you can get killed online by reviews. One angry customer can really do a lot of damage, especially if they're eloquent in how they write things. And gosh, there's so many places for reviews to be written, so many things that can hurt you in that respect. So, I know it's said often, but people don't necessarily truly do it. But doing the right thing with regards to customers is what matters most. If your company, they can do everything right, but if you don't get the customer service piece right, you're never going to be successful. It is critical because they will tell someone. And the flip side of that is you treat one customer, you go above and beyond. They're going to go tell people. They're going to comment on it. I mean, a prime example, LeaderSkills, we've never advertised, and all of our business is word of mouth because of, success. And it also goes to companies that, don't put their money where their mouth is. And, if someone's unhappy, why not give them a refund? Why try to hold someone to something that you did mess up just to make your bottom line better today? Because you're going to pay for that long term if you do not do the right thing today.
Yes, that's right. And we actually discussed this previously in more detail in a previous Business Sins episode on being rude to customers. And the guest I had on that episode really discussed some great examples of where they were treated rudely to the point to where they never went back. And I discussed some examples where I experienced rude customer service at a few different places. And what's even worse about that, in the examples I shared, nothing happened to any of the employees who were being rude. So there was a lack of accountability right there. There were other people complaining about the same employees. And to this very day, said employees are still working at that same place after endless complaints.
Well, did you know that 70% of most companies' budgets is payroll related, but less than 1% of that is training from that budget? And think about that for a minute. If less than 1% of that is for training, how much of it is even towards training them on how to be a good leader and how to hold people accountable the right way? I mean, it's funny to me, people focus on training tasks so often, like here's how you do your job, here's what needs to happen, but there's never anything about how to hold a team accountable properly, how to have those conversations, having a biweekly meeting just to check in with them. There's so much of that missing, I think, from the world out there today in terms of how to really be successful as a leader or as an employee, even in the business world today.
Yes, you've actually led me directly into my next question that I had for you. And that is, what should leaders, whether it be managers, owners, or other types of authority figures, do to foster a sense of accountability in the workplace? And you've already given a few examples, but what can they truly do to really help make sure that everybody knows what accountability is and that they are doing whatever they can to make sure they are held accountable and that they're doing the right thing every day, that they're not just brushing everything off, acting as if there's no problem?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things I could say, but I think it starts with you as the leader being, self-critical, starting there and asking how you can serve what your team needs and how to serve them best. Because at the end of the day, we are serving them. They are not serving us as a leader. Our job is to make them the best they can be. And I think so often people miss that or lose sight of that because we get so busy trying to do the things that we need to do every day and accomplish all the goals that we've set. Sometimes we haven't set them. They've been set for us. So that creates more stress. But, I really think that is the first thing of any leader is to really make sure that, you're truly serving the point of your role. And that is to serve your employees, your direct reports. And, it goes back to making sure you're making it a learning process. accountability should always be a learning process. And, if you're ever angry or if you ever, want to just kind of respond quickly without thinking about something that didn't go right, you need to check yourself as a leader and really step back and ask, okay, have I done something wrong? Because more often than not, it's because as a leader, there's something you haven't done to provide them with what they need to accomplish the goals. And, I just think self-criticism is very important as a leader.
Now, going back to toxic bosses, as you know, a lot of these toxic bosses are narcissistic. They will never be able to see their own faults. They'll spend all day yelling at and criticizing all their subordinates, but they will never criticize themselves because they truly think they're always right about everything. And based on the examples I gave you, you could tell what level of narcissism I was dealing with at the time when I was working at these other companies. And that's the problem. Too many of these authority figures, they're just so narcissistic, they just can't see their own faults. They see everybody else's fault, but they don't see their own. In fact, one of the guys I work for, anytime I tried to tell him he was wrong about something, he would just say, I don't want to hear it, and turn around and huff. That was all I needed to see to know what his true character was.
Absolutely.
When they never want to hear about their own faults, then not only hurts themselves, they just think they're right about everything. They think that their harsh criticism of how you did your work or how they nitpicked you on this, they think that all their comments are 100% accurate, that we are just to shut up and never question them and always take their word as gospel.
Yeah. And I do think there's a level of drinking your own Kool-Aid too in companies. Even like you mentioned earlier, nepotism. I'm so often as the employee or the person reporting to someone, you're always going to put on a happy face. And if their boss is around, you're always going to act like everything's great because that's what you have to do to make sure your direct supervisor is happy. So that goes back into being, self-critical and also allowing them the opportunity to give you that feedback. And I know that there's some leaders out there who they aren't leaders, really, they're managers. There's people out there who will never get it. But, having a regular meeting with someone and always asking, what can I do better for you? How can I serve you better? And really genuinely mean it and be ready for the response. And don't have a response back. Write it down, digest it, think about it, and then say, I'm going to think about that and how I can do better, and I'll bring it back in our next meeting. I think so often we just don't do that because we think everything's great because people are putting on these rose-colored glasses every time, it comes up what kind of leader they are, what kind of boss they are to work for. So, I've definitely worked for companies where everybody's like, this is great. We love it. It's amazing working here. But there's a lot behind the scenes when everybody isn't all pepped up that does need addressed that nobody's talking about, either out of fear of getting in trouble in some way or just because they don't know how to have the conversation because their direct supervisor has never offered that opportunity for them to do it. There's not a safe space to do it.
Unfortunately, and that's all because a lot of these leaders are just so toxic. The way their domineering demeanor just creates this sense of intimidation to where nobody wants to speak out or say anything. And what you said about wearing rose-colored glasses, that's something you will never see me doing. I've always been a tell-it-like-it-is person, and it does come off as rather harsh and brash at times, but I often need people to hear the truth. I'm never going to sugarcoat anything or tell you everything's good when it's not. For one thing, sugarcoating is lying. Anytime you sugarcoat because you're worried about offending someone, I'm not that type of person. I will tell it like it is. Sugarcoating is lying, plain and simple. But this type of narcissism goes beyond just the workplace. Anybody in any type of authority will often have, a degree of narcissism, whether it be police officers or judges, and especially with politicians. And one thing that I've noticed is that the bigger the false sense of authority that you have, what I mean is you believe you have this sense of authority when in reality you don't. The bigger that belief, the bigger your power trips are going to be. I've noticed that all the time with different people who had no business being an authority and never were an authority, but they believe they are. And this is especially true with people like security guards, for example. A lot of them want people to believe they have the same sense of authority a police officer has. That's one example.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Well, and I think that we all fall prey to, if we've had a success, we think it's because we know how to do it and do it right. But sometimes it had nothing to do with us. Or maybe we did do it right for that situation, but that doesn't mean it's right for the next. And, I think you oftentimes will see people in positions where they've had early wins and they become very overly confident in themselves and lose that skepticism and then just stop listening. because they think they know the right way to do it because they've had some early wins in their career.
And it's funny you bring that up because, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm going to share a little story with you, and I want you to tell me, please, if it relates to exactly what you just said here. Back in December of 2023, this doesn't have anything to do with the workplace, but rather with an encounter I had during a traffic stop with a police officer. So, back in December of 2023, I was at a stop sign in a neighborhood. It looked like it was all clear for me to go, so I was getting ready to make my left turn. But as I I made my left turn, another car slammed on his brakes because I did not see this car coming. And that car was a constable. Out of all people, it was a constable. So I parallel park against the curb. He gets out, he's not yelling or anything, but of course he's not friendly either. He's being rather firm. He asks the usual traffic stop procedures. Let me have your driver's license and insurance, which I gave him. So right now it seems like everything's pretty reasonable, right? But then he did something that made me feel uncomfortable. He made me get out of the car. He made me sit on the hood of my car with my hands flush on the hood so we could start interrogating me about my bad stop at that stop sign. He was trying to get me to basically admit that I ran that stop sign. His exact words were, "You thought you could just blow that stop sign?" And I told him I did not blow that stop sign. I was parked and I did not see you coming. And I told him that there was a tree in front of a house there that obstructed my view. And I was just trying to stand my ground. I wasn't going to just let him try to make me admit something. Yeah, I told him, yeah, it's a stupid mistake for me to do that, but I wasn't going to allow him to make me admit something that I didn't want to admit to because it wasn't true. I was stopped at the sign, but he just made me sit on the hood of my car with my hands flush on my hood while he's interrogating me about it. And then after about a good 5 or 10 minutes of him asking me questions that I felt were just inappropriate, he told me, "Okay, go back to your car and don't move." So that's exactly what I do. I go back and I'm waiting for him to bring me back my license and my insurance so I can get out of there. And of course, I'm saying a prayer, asking God to help me leave the stop safely. And honestly, when he made me get out of the car, I thought he was taking me to jail that day over a stop sign. But he brought back my license and insurance and he told me, "I'm not going to give you a ticket because my computer is down. I couldn't issue a ticket." But then he says in a rather snarky tone, "But you really should be getting a citation for this." So he gives me my stuff back. We say bye to each other and I leave. And of course, we all know never to make things worse than they have to be. He told me I can go. I didn't argue with him. I got out of there without saying anything else. But I don't know. In your opinion, would you say that this showed narcissism on his part? And also because he made me get out of the car, it also showed that he didn't trust me at all. I mean, of course, he doesn't know me, so he's not going to trust me. Obviously, me and that officer weren't friends. We didn't know each other. But overall, would you say that that applies to exactly what you just told me?
Yeah, I think what's interesting there is, he absolutely assumed intent on your part, right? He jumped to a lot of conclusions there. He has no idea what you were doing and why you were doing it, but he had already made it up in his mind. And that happens so often in all of our lives, right? Where you do something and someone gets upset and because they expect that you have reacted the way they would have to something, or you have done something in a way they would have. And he just made that assumption that you intentionally ran that sign, right? Which is not remotely what happened, but so often we are all guilty probably of that to a degree, but yeah, I think some way more than others because they, can't see beyond themselves. The world's revolving around them. And that's really hard to deal with someone when they're treating you that way.
And I'm not going to lie, I am guilty of getting angry and blowing my top in years past over an assumption that was proven wrong right in front of my face. I just thought I'd throw that out there so that, that way everybody knows I'm not being two-faced or hypocritical. Because you're right, we've all had moments like that. And they're humbling moments once we realize that all of our assumptions that we made that made us angry were 1,000,000% wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely think that happens. It is very humbling when you realize you're in the wrong. But that's key. Anger is always a sign that you need to do something different on your part. If you're angry about something, that probably means there's a conversation you haven't had, or maybe that person is just crazy. Maybe they're just not reasonable to work with. But typically, if we're getting angry about something, especially at work, there's some kind of conversation that needs to happen. And whether that's a conversation just to get it off your back, to worry about it and put the burden on them, and just be able to wash your hands of it and walk away. Something needs to happen there if you walk away from something angry to make it a better situation for everybody.
Right, because there's so many professional ways of handling it rather than just blowing your top and telling that person off. And to me, people who jump to a lot of conclusions, like you just said, without actually studying the facts, people like that are crazy. People like that do not belong in positions of power. And people who blow their top and get angry and just like to chew people out over small things, those people have no business being in positions of leadership. Those people are not leaders. They're not managers. They're not even dictators. They're monsters.
Yeah, they can definitely feel that way for sure. And it's one of our classes we offer is for conflict management. And it really brings to light some very basic, but very, very impactful tidbits. Like, all conflict comes from unspoken or unmet expectations. Like, that's it. That's what causes it. And how often do we get angry about something or have conflict because, something we didn't even tell them we expected of them wasn't done? It's like, well, why didn't you do that? Well, you didn't tell me, but until you talk to them, you just don't realize that you both have different assumptions going on in your head about how something should have gone or how it should have been. And oftentimes holding people accountable is very much tied to understanding upfront expectations and setting those expectations and speaking about them to make sure everyone's on the same page.
When you're in a position of authority and you get angry at your subordinate because they didn't do something that you expected them to do but never told them to begin with, that alone just shows you're narcissistic. And some of my bosses I had in years past were exactly like that. They had that exact same mindset. And it falls back onto what I said earlier, when they believe that you need to be better at God at your job or you're terrible at it. That's what they believe. They would get real angry when you didn't meet an expectation that they never even told you about to begin with. And when you tried to tell them about it, they would just walk away in a huff and say, I don't want to hear it. That's narcissism at its finest right there.
Yeah, I don't want to hear it is definitely a red flag to get the heck out of that job. For sure. That's something you can't change. And that's the kind of life, that boss is never going to change at all. So getting yourself out of there is the best thing you can do for your own health.
Needless to say, after having too many encounters with him, I started putting out resumes. I started looking on job boards. I did not want to be there anymore.
I can understand that.
Now, going back to the customer relations side of things, my next question for you is related to how can broken customer relations be mended? So when the lack of accountability has damaged a relationship with a customer or even a colleague or coworker, should those responsible attempt to mend the wounds, or would this be a waste of time? Meaning that should they believe that the damage is done, they shouldn't try to make things better, or should they try to offer a solution even though it looks like they're already beyond the point of no return at that point?
Yeah, I think ultimately you should always, once you realize a mistake has been made, you should always make an attempt to resolve that. And that's in your personal life and work life. I think, there's always a moment where, you may look back and be like, oh my gosh, that wasn't what I thought, or that I was mad about something that I had no right to be. I think you always need to try to go back and do that. One thing we do talk about is nonviolent communication. It's a book by Marshall Rosenberg that's just pretty awesome and just really gives you like an outline on how to have those hard conversations. And I think the key is when you go into those meetings or phone calls, however you're speaking with them, you go in with, a good heart, with good intent, and you have to be very direct about it. But you also have to accept at the end of that conversation that whether they accept it or not, it's off your shoulders at that point. The burden's off of you. You've done what you can to resolve it. But ultimately, if there has been a mistake made, you should always bend over backwards to try to figure out what you can do to resolve it, or at least let them know that you recognize that. Because the reality is we all make mistakes. Nobody is perfect. And, if you don't have those conversations with people, they're going to trust you more for admitting you're wrong than they will ever trust you for doing everything right all day. So those conversations are so important. But again, you have to be ready for it. Some people can't be won back. If you really did mess something up, sometimes people just have too high of expectations and you can't overcome that. But knowing you've always tried to do the right thing and being able to take that burden off you is the key, not only to your mental health and happiness, but also it's going to pay off long-term in work. It's going to pay off with your customers long-term if you do those things.
Right. And that goes back to what we said earlier about when you offer great customer service. And I talk about this constantly throughout other episodes of BizCast because I hold 5-star customer service near and dear to my heart as a business owner. When you can offer them that 5-star experience, they're going to tell the world about you. But conversely, if you offer a bad experience, they're also going to tell the world about your company as well. And the word's going to go viral. All the angry customers who got a 1-star experience or 2-star experience, they're also going to tell the world about you. They're going to tell everybody, don't go there. They're rude. They don't deliver on time. They don't care about you as a customer. They'll steal your money. They're scammers. Things like that. Those things can flat out destroy a business. Alternatively, if you can offer a 5-star service, you can expect to see revenue growth. Right now, CDG is all 5-star reviews. All of our customers have been happy with us, and we get a lot of word-of-mouth business. We built our company on word-of-mouth referrals, but imagine if it was the other way around. Imagine if I never got the websites done on time, or I got it partially done and the customer spent $1,000. If that were the case, CDG would not even be in business right now.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I completely agree. I also own a real estate company because, why not have 3 companies? But I must say that side of the business, it's something we take with pride, across all of it. LeaderSkills, if you're not happy after the first session, we offer a full refund, but nobody's taken us up on that. We take a lot of pride in that. And the same with the real estate company, 5 stars, something I very much cherished being able to say that. And it's not because I did everything right with everyone. I genuinely believe it's because I do, go back if something was done wrong and say, wow, I'm sorry, but I'm going to fix that. And I think people really respect that and think very highly of it.
I've actually had something like that happen to me back in 2018. I shared the story in previous BizCast episodes where a customer was angry and I took it upon myself to make sure that the reason they were angry was mended. So let me explain what happened. So I made the mistake of hiring a contractor to go to a client's job site to take some photos of their products for their own website, which my company was also doing. And I trusted him to go down there and do the work because we were already paid up front for it. Then next thing you know, I'm getting a call from the client angry saying that he never showed up, he never took the photos, and they wanted to know where he was. So I called him up and I found out that he just didn't want to go. He slept in. He also made other excuses saying things like that he was studying for an exam, like he was in college, and he never showed up. So I'm not even going to try to reschedule because I immediately no longer trust him, and I know that it's time to give the client a refund for their money. So she reaches out saying she wants a refund. So I tell her, please send me your Zelle ID because we paid with Zelle, and I will send you the money. She never sent me her Zelle ID, whether it's the phone number or the email. Here's what happened instead. She showed up unannounced at my office when I wasn't there, and we shared office with another business, an optical lab, believe it or not, where they make glasses, prescription glasses. And she showed up there unannounced, and she started making a big stink about not getting the refund, and she went into the optical lab, started complaining to them, all angry and upset. And I was already extremely upset that she did this because she went in there and disrupted their business when they had nothing to do with it. And on top of that, she showed up unannounced, and when that's not allowed, I have signs all over that office saying you must have an appointment if you want to see us, mainly because I know I'm not there all the time. And she went ahead and broke that rule and caused all this trouble. But eventually I was able to finally get a hold of her, and I just wrote her a check and gave her money back that way. I held myself accountable for the lack of responsibility from the photographer. I held myself accountable for the fact that he did not show because he was my contractor. But I also attempted to remedy the problem by showing her that I wanted to give her the refund. He just never responded. Instead, she chose to respond by showing up unannounced, creating all sorts of chaos at the neighboring business. I had nothing to do with it, and it was just really terrible. So what can you do when you attempt to remedy the problem, but the receiving end wants nothing to do with it? They just want to go ahead and take matters into their own hands, and it usually ends up getting really ugly. What's the appropriate response in that case?
Oh, that one is so specific to that one's hard because it really depends on the client, what their expectations are. It's so individual. That one's a little hard for me to answer. But one thing I have learned is if anyone ever does go on the attack, anywhere that they try to do that, making sure you always respond calmly and keep stressing what you have done to try to solve the problem for you. But something I have found interesting too is just saying, I'm on your team. I know it doesn't feel like it, but I want to be on your team. How can I help you? And some people are going to be like her. No matter what you do, they're not going to be happy. But I do believe if you always try to handle it the right way, it'll be okay in the end. But there's just some you can never win back. And you can't let those wear you down. You'll end up pretty miserable if you hang on to those too often because some people are just miserable and want everyone to be miserable with them. But hopefully there's a lot less of those than there are other type of people, which are most of us are just trying to do the best we can with the time we have and with the knowledge we have.
And what you said about how some people are just miserable and they make others miserable, that certainly applied to her because during our preliminary meeting at her office to talk about the work that needed to be done, the contract photographer was with me that day, and I had to leave for a little bit and leave him there. But he told me one thing that he witnessed about her was that, because, it was a family-owned business, she worked with her mother. He told me that he saw her chewing out her mom and telling her off, complaining about certain things. He told me she was just flat out obnoxious and started talking down to her own mom over something that she did. And that alone tells me that she is one of those toxic bosses who has no business being in a position of power. And not only that, if you're going to treat your internal team like that, then I sure hate to see how you treat your customers. People like that should not be business owners. People like that should be working for somebody in an office with strict supervision.
Absolutely. And that's a great point for all business owners to keep in mind too, is who you choose to work with is very important. And I know early on, because, growing a business. I have a few businesses I've started. I know how hard it is. You want to take all the business you can up front to build your portfolio, but aligning yourself with customers who are not necessarily, great companies to work for or great leaders, that can reflect on you in some ways. And if you're asking your team to work with people like that, that's going to wear on your team. So it is very important to not just take on all clients and really think about how this specific client, every time you take someone on, will affect your team overall.
And on top of that, new business owners who are starting out for the first time, they need to stop making the same rookie mistake that almost all of them make, which is believing that everyone is your customer.
Yeah, that's true. That is very true. I think one of the best things is when you can really get comfortable in a business. And I'm sure you can probably have lived this too, but the first 5 years are always so hard. You want to take everybody on, but you'll end up spending more time on those, let's say, fussy clients than you will on the clients who are great clients. And then your great clients, their service is going to suffer for it. So it's important to really be careful in who you do work with.
That's exactly right. The fussy clients are usually the ones who have all the demands, and they usually want to pay the least amount of money for the work. And what you said about the first 5 years being rough, they were especially rough for CDG because I started CDG in 2017. Guess which year fell within those first 5 years? 2020, the year everybody was suffering. And 2021 was even worse than 2020. In fact, I thought I was going to be turning out our lights for the last time that year because it didn't look good. 2021, due to the effects of the COVID pandemic, was the year CDG almost went out of business because a lot of our customers were either going to free alternatives to our services, or they went to other companies that were cheaper, or they used their family members to save money to get those services that we would normally offer. And it was the first year where cash outflow far exceeded cash inflow. It was that bad. I thought I was going out of business that year.
Yeah. I think we all learned a lot of lessons through that. For sure. It was definitely rough for, I think, a lot of us.
It certainly was. But in this episode, I certainly learned a lot from you about what it takes to be a better leader. And I'm glad that you shared all of these great tidbits of information. And I hope all of the toxic bosses out there, of course, they're not going to know they're a toxic boss because they think they're always right all the time. But if they happen to have that wake-up call, I hope that this episode will be the one that gives it to them. I'm going to go ahead and get ready to wrap up. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us that we didn't discuss that you feel would be very important for the leadership world, especially to learn and understand?
No, I think the biggest tidbit of what we talked about is just, really stressing that conflict comes from unspoken or unmet expectations. And anytime you're upset at work, at home, think about that. Think about what maybe hasn't been said or what you needed to have said to make this a better situation. I think that changes so much about how we all communicate, and it just makes our lives a lot calmer. Calmer is a better way to put it. It makes things a lot easier in life.
In general, I think everybody out there, especially those who are in leadership positions, need to end their day having a self-reflection moment. Think about what you did. If you were chewing your employees out and nitpicking everything they were doing, stop and think about why you did that. Instead of thinking you're always right about everything all the time, instead think about why you did that and try to justify your reasoning. And if the only justification you have is that you believe that because you're in charge, you are always right and that your subordinates are never to question you, then guess what? You have some serious improvement to do. And those are my final words.
Absolutely.
And that's my final word on the subject. Don't be a toxic leader. If somebody on your team did something that harmed the company or a customer relationship as a whole, own it. Don't just walk away from it. Don't run away from it. Own it. If you're responsible, own it. Own your mistakes. Do what you can to correct them and make sure that in the end, everybody is happy and that everything is mended to where you can continue operating business as usual. But yes, thank you, Holly, for joining us on this episode. I hope that this episode truly will bring that wake-up call to all those toxic leaders. I learned a lot from it. I would certainly like to see all of those who can't see their own faults get off their high horse and try to learn something new for a change and do some self-improvement. And in the end, you'll see that business will boom better for you. Your team will have higher morale and you will see higher profits and revenue in the end.
Thank you for having me, Christian. I really enjoyed it.
Yes. And thank you for sharing all this wonderful information once again. You are certainly a textbook example of someone who deserves to be in a leadership position.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. But I can't say I've always been that way. I don't think any of us are born great leaders, for sure. It's definitely a long road to bettering yourself and, really looking at yourself to get that way. But I appreciate you saying that.
And that's exactly what you did. You bettered yourself. When you realized that you could improve, what did you do? You went ahead and got coaching. And whenever someone acknowledges their own faults, that truly shows that they are mature in their character.
Yeah, that is definitely the first step I've learned to helping someone be the best they can be, is when they acknowledge they need that extra step. So I agree.
Right? Again, the right thing to do is acknowledge your fault instead of having a narcissistic mentality where you think you're always right about everything and that everything you do is helping everybody, but when in fact it's damaging. And just remember, you can make yourself a better leader and a better person in general if you take accountability for your actions and start to think about where you can improve upon. Thank you, Holly. I hope you have a great rest of your day. I certainly will be inviting you back on for more episodes of BizCast in the future, and I certainly wish you the best in all of your business ventures.
Thank you, and the same to you.